Hey everyone, welcome back to Rushing the Field, a weekly national college football show from NBC Sports. He's Joshua Perry. I'm Nicole Auerbach. And Joshua, I am in Nashville right now where they are still buzzing about this Vanderbilt upset. Like, my Uber driver was telling me that they actually have a football team that looks like a football team now. They're still pumped about that win over Alabama.
As they should be. And yes, it is a football team that looks like a football team. Wild weekend last week, but this was the one that I think everybody had circled, was this upcoming weekend, October 12th, all the big matchups that we have. Going to preview them all for you, but like if we can get a little bit more chaos, I think the college football fans will be happy.
Yeah, we named the show Rushing the Field without knowing exactly how many field storms there would be. There were a lot last weekend, but you're right. October 12th was the one everyone's like, don't go to a fall wedding on this Saturday because you're going to miss something. So let's just start with some game previews. We got to dive into our game, NBC, 7:30 p.m. Eastern. This might be the game of the season in college football as Oregon hosts Ohio State. 2-3 showdown, over under 52.5 points. Ohio State favored by 3.5. This is going to be an awesome one, Joshua. And I think what's really interesting to start is I feel much better about Ohio State coming into this based on how they have been playing in recent weeks on both sides of the ball than I do about Oregon. 3 red zone interceptions from Dillon Gabriel in the last 2 games. I have some concerns about that.
Yeah, it's a really interesting matchup. I tend to agree with the idea that I'm more comfortable with Ohio State right now than Oregon, although Will Howard does have a trend. Last 3 games has thrown an interception. Dillon Gabriel, the interceptions that he had in particular last week against Michigan State, they directly took points off the board there. Everybody's going to talk about the skill in this football game, and we know what exists for Ohio State. Mentioned Will Howard, the wide receivers, Jeremiah Smith, Emeka Egbuka, both of them I got to catch up with this week. And if you watch the pregame show, you get to see an awesome feature. The two-headed monster at running back with Quinshawn Judkins and Travion Henderson. We know the skill for Ohio State. Very similar for Oregon. Dillon Gabriel has been playing football forever, and a lot of people believe that the Oregon wide receivers are a better, more deep group than what Ohio State has. I believe this game is won in the trenches. I do. Ohio State's offensive line has played much better football this year, and Oregon's defensive line has really started to come on. I think if Ohio State can lean on them, they can stay on schedule first and second down, it becomes a different game. Flip it over. The Oregon offensive line was a question. Early on the season, they didn't play well. Ohio State's defensive line has had this conversation about the edges, these guys who could be first-round picks, and we haven't necessarily seen first-round play. If they can protect Dillon Gabriel, which they've done a really good job of the last few weeks, again, the complexion of the game changes. So as much as you got the shiny toys out there and all the great skill, I'm really looking at the trenches. Big Ten football, that's where it's won and lost.
I also love the shiny toys, though. Like, that's what's so exciting about this game. And I want to hear a little bit about the time that you did spend with Jeremiah Smith and Emeka Egbuka, because Jeremiah Smith is so good as a true freshman. He's going to break all sorts of records for the Buckeyes. And he and Ryan Williams at Alabama are by far like the 2 star freshman receivers, which is insane. But like, you look at Jeremiah Smith's numbers, he's already almost 500 receiving yards. He's averaging almost 20 yards a catch, 7 total touchdowns on the season. Like, he is going to break all of those records, and I think he could very well be the best of all of these insanely talented receivers that have run through Ohio State in recent years. So when you spent time with him and Emeka, like what did you get from them? What was the energy, the confidence, what makes them work and what makes him work so well as a true freshman on this stage?
Yeah, I'll talk about Jeremiah first, and then I'll kind of talk about the both of them together. But Jeremiah walks in, we're getting set up for the interview, and I look at the SID for Ohio State, and I said, "This is Jeremiah." I'm like, "This is the freshman. He's humongous. He looks like what a freshman linebacker." No, seriously, like when I was his age, that's what I looked like. He looks like what I came into Ohio State looking like. He is a physical specimen, not an ounce of fat on his body, super lean. Big. He's got these mitts. Go to shake his hand. I got big hands. His hand swallowed mine up. Like, just a physical specimen, a freak of nature from that standpoint. So that's number one with him. But then you start to talk to him. Very serious, very measured demeanor. I would ask a question. He would think about it before he would answer. He's a guy who is so serious for being so young. And I think that's why he's been able to play well. They told me about the offseason. He comes in. And he's in the weight room, like not trying to lose any competitions. And when he did, he was pissed off. Like he was genuinely mad. He wanted to come in. He wanted to be really good right away. But he had the approach to match the desire. And I think that's really important. Now, where Emeka comes into this, he's kind of flown under the radar. Last year was banged up. He's really good, but hasn't really been talked about. Now, of course, we're talking about him because he's performing back to the level we thought he could. Part of the reason he came back was to mentor a guy like Jeremiah. And he took it upon himself to make sure that in the weight room, he was a guy who was, taking Jeremiah through and trying to get the wins in the competition early on to really mold him. And he's embraced that leadership role. And they've developed a great relationship. This wide receiver room is as close as it's ever been, is what they've told me. But the idea for Emeka to take a young player under his wing and kind of teach him the way to be the next great one in that Ohio State wide receiver room, I think that combination is really important. Jeremiah would have been really good regardless, but I do think his pairing with Emeka has accelerated his development.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. And I think you can definitely see it in the maturity and the way that they interact during games and before games and after games. I love the running backs too. I mean, you already had Travion Henderson. You bring in Quinshon Judkins, one of the best players out of the portal. I don't think there's a better running back duo anywhere in the country. So you have that as well, which is just such a luxury for Will Howard, who, he comes in here and really what he needs to do is be better than Kyle McCord was last year, because Kyle McCord was really good across the board, except when they absolutely needed him to be great, to beat Michigan, to beat like that caliber team. And here is Will Howard going to have that opportunity to do that. Dylan Gabriel on the other side, we've talked about the interceptions he's thrown. That's someone who I thought going into the season was going to be leading the Heisman Trophy race, was going to be the kind of player who could go out and win Oregon some games. I've been talking to coaches who played both of these teams over the course of the last week. And one thing that was really interesting when talking to coaches about Gabriel is they were just talking about how he's not running much this year. He used to kind of be that guy who would do whatever it takes to keep a play alive. So whether or not that's then launch a deep ball or scramble, he's not really doing that. And they think he's trying to prepare for the NFL and that he's trying to show he can be an NFL pocket passer. So they're just not seeing that part of his game. And then they're seeing that when he's under pressure and the windows get tighter, he is just not as sharp and it's not like a panic, but it's just not the same as when he has no pressure and he has time to throw. And we see that like really high completion percentage.
Yeah, I'm totally with you. Like just from my film study this week, I do think he is more comfortable when he's on the move. But to your point, like guys now we're seeing veteran quarterbacks that make moves in the portal. They do so because they want to be developed as NFL players. And so maybe it's a little bit out of his nature and he has to think about not necessarily evading. Now he's really good when he is on the move. And I think it's something that they're going to have to do against Ohio State to unlock the best of Dylan Gabriel. The other thing to your point, though, about him being in the pocket, and this is the big battle because Ohio State's got two defensive tackles, Ty Hamilton, Tyleik Williams, that I think are really, really good players. The interior of the Oregon offensive line had trouble. They had shuffled that lineup trying to figure out who the guys were. Dylan Gabriel's not a big dude. And so if I'm a defensive coordinator and I'm preparing for Oregon, I'm telling my edge rushers that it's a controlled rush. It's not the week to throw your best pass rush move, because we need you to make sure that he cannot escape the pocket. The work is going to be done by forcing the pocket in through the interior. And when you can get into the face of a smaller quarterback, now all of a sudden the sight lines become different. Now he can't really step into the throws, and that can have an effect in the game. So I do think like the quarterback matchup is a big one. To your point, Will Howard is what you came here for, right? And this is the situations you got to be great. And for Dylan Gabriel, it's kind of like the nature versus nurture, like your nature of how you want to play versus what you're being nurtured to do to prepare for the league.
Yeah. And again, he's won these types of games before. That's part of the reason, Oregon wanted him. It was such a coup to get him. So we'll see with this. Before we get off of this game, though, because it's such a fascinating one, again, Ohio State is favored by a couple of points coming in, even though they'll be going 2+ time zones away and playing in a hostile environment at Autzen. I do want to talk about the coaches and really like what's at stake from a macro sense. Now, both of these coaches have, won so many games at their schools. They are among the young rising stars, faces of the sport. but both of them have struggled to win like this type of game, a top 5 showdown. The games that, define legacies. I mean, we've talked so much over the years about Ryan Day and his record against Michigan. He's lost to Georgia. Dan Lanning couldn't beat Washington, also lost to Georgia. Like, these are the kinds of games that define coaches, and neither of these coaches is very good in this setting. So one of them will win it. That is the positive here. But like Joshua, when you look at both of them, let's start with Ryan Day. How do you set up what's at stake for him?
Well, I think there's more at stake, right? Like, Ryan Day was at the point in this offseason where there were a lot of people, and we're talking fans, we're talking former players, that were not impressed. They weren't impressed with the loss to Michigan. Certainly, they were not impressed with the performance against Missouri in the bowl game. And then to watch Michigan win the title, I think just was the icing on the cake.
Didn't help
a lot of people's feelings this offseason. And so there's pressure, and the narratives have been out about Ryan Day in the big games, right? And just to point out, neither one of these coaches lose to unranked opponents. It's not something that they've done. And I do think there's credit that is deserved for that, because we watched what happened last weekend with some of these top teams. Like, you gotta be able to win the ones you should win too. But again, everybody, when you get to this level, wants to win the big game. So I think there is pressure. I will say, I watched practice. I spent the whole day in the building. These guys were focused, but it wasn't tight. Right. Like, they were very workmanlike. I heard the Tuesday practice was off the charts in terms of the intensity and the physicality. Wednesday was very sharp for them. So I think they're locked in, but I don't think they're trying to make too much of it to the point where guys are like, stressed out. For Dan Lanning, I've said this. I started saying it last year. I said it all through the offseason to you. Dan Lanning and Ryan Day are the same guy to me, right? They're just in different stages. But what we see out of Dan Lanning is really what the start of Ryan Day's career was, where he was a top 5 coach and he was a guy who was kind of next up. And then as we got further into it, he didn't win the big games, and we started asking the questions. I think this could be the game where people start the narrative on Dan Lanning of, well, when are you going to win the big one? Or can you win the big one if they don't win this one? So more at stake for Ryan Day because it's more urgent right now, but I think Dan Lanning could start to feel that too.
Yeah, I mean, I just think it's so hot for Ryan Day. This is a team that was constructed for a national championship run. Yes. It's championship or bust, and it's been that way because of the NIL, the retention, the guys like Emeka who came back, then bringing in Caleb Downs, bringing in Quinshon Judkins, bringing in Will Howard. Like, the standard is so high there. And this year, considering 3 losses to Michigan, as you mentioned, Michigan winning a title, it just couldn't be a bigger, more high-pressure situation for Ryan Day. And so this is the type of game you absolutely have to win, even though we could very well get a rematch of this in the Big Ten championship game. I think there's way more pressure on the Ohio State side of this. And again, I think that they have the clear edge coming into this game. I think they a more well-rounded, better constructed roster right now. I have less questions about them, but I do think there is a lot of pressure under Ryan Day. And if you win something like this, maybe that just changes like the rest of the season and the course of the season. Like you said, the focus level, but the tension that has existed there since we were there in the spring for the spring game. Like it wasn't like crazy tense, but there was I don't know, my like shoulders tensed up just like thinking about it, right? Like there's pressure in the spring. I've been in
that building where it's been like that, where it has been tense, and that is a big deal. And this does go a long way to your point of not relaxing, not necessarily having the exhale, but of just like relieving some of that built up pressure and tension.
Yeah. And again, just proving that you can win these kinds of games, because to win a national championship with the 12-team playoff, you will have to win multiple games. Like, you will have to get through a gauntlet to get there. So this is going to be a fascinating one. Cannot wait to watch it. Joshua, can't wait to get your preview in your feature in our pregame show. So everyone definitely tune in at 7:00 Eastern on NBC. Cannot wait. 2 versus 3 showdown. But there's a lot of other games I want to hit on quickly because, again, this was the schedule. And you look at the schedule, you're like, all right, I can't. I'm sorry, like Cousin Larry, I can't come to the wedding. There are too many games that I need to be seated for. Let's talk about Penn State traveling to USC. Penn State's favored by 5.5 points, over under 50.5 points. I think we got to start with the coaches in this one too, because it feels like a must win for both of these coaches. James Franklin comes into this as the poster child for the 12-team college football playoff. Penn State would have been in this thing more than anybody else over the last 10 years. Now it's here. You don't have to play Michigan and Ohio State every year. Like, the path is open for Penn State. They've played pretty well this season. Like, I feel like their ceiling, we don't know what that is, but the floor seems to be pretty high. Like, they're winning, they're not pulling away from teams like Illinois and UCLA. But this is the kind of game you need to win to prove that you are a playoff type team. And what James Franklin's been talking about all week is like the length of the runway at State College that they have to bus before they fly to LA. So I got some questions about that. But on the other side, Joshua, is Lincoln Riley, who basically has the same record as Clay Helton through the start of his USC tenure. So got some questions there too.
Yeah, and Lincoln Riley had a Heisman Trophy winner. Let's be very clear about that. I do think this is a big one for the coaches. I'll start with Lincoln Riley real quick. And I think things could start to get really weird for him out there in Southern California. He was paid a ton of money to go out there. With that comes the expectations of delivering in terms of wins. You step into the Big Ten, and it's like, it's a meat grinder this year. And just, I've been talking to different coaches in different places as well. And they're like, Rutgers tough out now. Like, Indiana's not a doormat anymore. It's hard trying to just point to where you're going to get the wins. And so he's up against that, no doubt. But then it's like, Lincoln Riley's got the personality. It's a little prickly with the media and like turning people off. And like, that's when you start to lose friends out there. So certainly this would be a big one for them. I actually almost picked them as my underdog to pull off the upset. I do think that there's a pathway to victory for USC here. Now, on the Penn State side with James Franklin, this is a year, right? Like, everybody said this is a year. You're supposed to be in the playoff. People looked at the schedule and said 11-1, probably lose to Ohio State. You'd love to get that win. They're playing at home against Ohio State this year. But like 11-1, very reasonable. You're a playoff team. Well, now you got to fly out to Southern California. You mentioned the issues that they're having with the airport. I'll talk about in a sec. It's going to be tough. And again, USC, even with the loss to Minnesota, even with the loss to Michigan, you're not just going to sleep on them. Like, if they put together two halves of good football, they can absolutely win that game. Now, this airport thing for me, Nicole, is really interesting because it is a legitimate issue, right? Like, you've been to State College. I've been there numerous times. It is a small facility. You're not flying the big planes. I totally get that. And now they have a need because of the conference realignment to do it. This is also like a real lobbying issue to like state legislatures and to like the federal government with TSA and everything, and like how you would get that done. So I don't know how far talking about it in the media actually goes, but I've got a little bit of a hot take. This might be James Franklin saying, when I leave and go to Florida, don't act surprised. Right? Like, I mean, it's one of those things where it's like he's expressing some displeasure and something that's probably not easy to get done. But like, you never love when a coach is out there expressing displeasure.
Yeah. And he would complain about facilities and different things. And like, they made progress on those things, like when he's asked for stuff, he's gotten it. He's been there a long time, over a decade. But
this is not something that he can ask for and they can snap their fingers. And get done.
No, and also, like, by the way, everyone else is trapped. Like, to get to State College, do you know how hard that is for all of their opponents on a regular basis? I do think the travel point is a valid one. We have seen this stat all week. Big Ten teams going 2 or more time zones away are 1-7 on the season. And that one win was Indiana over UCLA. We're going to talk to Curt Cignetti a little bit later in the show. They actually did something a little bit different. They went later. They went Friday evening, and a lot of these other teams are going on Thursday. But like, they also had to bus from Bloomington to Indianapolis to get a plane that was big enough. So like there are logistical changes and issues with the new Big Ten. So like that game is just like what you envision though when you look at the new conference. You get a USC Penn State clash right in October. Like, that's awesome. And so it's just a fascinating time for both of those teams to get each other. USC coming off of these losses against kind of like those traditional Big Ten teams, and the Minnesota game, the way that it ended, Lincoln Riley's still upset about the overturned play that gave Minnesota the touchdown, which I think should have just been called a touchdown on the field. So there's just a lot going on in that one. There's also a lot going on in Lincoln Riley's old school, Oklahoma. We got the Cotton Bowl this weekend, Red River rivalry showdown. Texas favored by 14.5 points against Oklahoma. It's a top 20 game. Quinn Ewers expected back at quarterback for the Longhorns. And on the other side, true freshman Michael Hawkins Jr. is starting for Oklahoma. This is the first time a true freshman has started this game for the Sooners ever. Brett Venables said that he has faith in him, that he thinks he has a lot of maturity. He's an easy guy to bet on. I think the biggest question for this one, Joshua, considering how good Texas is how rusty is Quinn Ewers? Like, that's really my only concern, because I think that's the only way that, like, a team that feels to be in a totally different category and a different echelon in the sport right now than Oklahoma would keep this game close. I will say Oklahoma won it last year. Weird things have happened. The stadium is split 50-50 in this one. But to me, it's about Quinn Ewers after a few weeks off with his injury.
Yeah, I'm with you there. And it's interesting too. Like, if Quinn Ewers, and this is not me wish casting anything, people, but if he goes out there and like throws 2 interceptions early, do they throw the hook and just bring back?
No.
Like, but I know, but it would jeopardize you in a game like this where weird things do happen in that rivalry. Like, those are the types of things that might be floating in the back of his head too. So certainly that could play into this game. The other thing I'll just say is a quick note on Texas. As good as I do think they are, I have a legitimate question about how good their defense actually is. Because going back through, they have not played good offenses. And frankly, we're probably not going to find out how good their defense is in this game. And so that's probably my one question for the number 1 team in the country. It's a good unit. I'm trying to understand how good. But to your point, like, it feels like the most likely way that this game goes off the rails for Texas is if Quinn Ewers comes out there and he looks like he's coming off of an injury.
Yeah. And by the way, they've been super clear about him being QB1. I've seen a bunch of social posts about him being back. And so I'd be surprised if Arch gets into this game and it's not like
it's all good until he throws a couple picks, puts the ball on the ground in the pocket, and then it's like, QB1. It sounds good.
I know. But this is part of the reason that, like, there's a dynamic there, but they still are super envious, right? Like, nobody else has a backup quarterback situation like this. And getting Arch a couple starts actually really helps them for the rest of the season. So we'll continue to track on Texas. They're unbeaten. Number 1 team in the country after a well-timed bye when the rest of the sport, like, chaos fell and hit everyone. Want to get your quick thoughts on a top 15 game. Ole Miss goes to LSU, favored by 3.5 points, rebounded from that Kentucky loss with a ho-hum 27-3 win over South Carolina. Basically, the biggest storyline with Ole Miss right now is everyone's accusing them of faking injuries. Shane Beamer went off on them after the last game, after the South Carolina game. He said, quote, "It's fascinating to me how many injuries occur from them after the opposing offense makes a first down or has a big play. You go back and watch the Wake Forest game, and it happens a lot to the same guy." 11 injury timeouts in that game last week against South Carolina.
I'll say I know of coaching staffs who used to designate the guy who would fake the injury, and they would call, submarine, something to that effect, go down. Right. Like that's a real thing. So I also don't know if you heard me in the green room when this game was going on. And I said that guy was faking. Like, it was pretty obvious what they were doing. So it's one of the things about the sport that I cannot stand. And I know that it's one of those things that they try to officiate, but like, how are you going to tell a guy he's hurt? And, coaches get all mad. Oh, you booed our hurt guy. And it's like, I get it, but I think we all understood why he got booed. He wasn't really hurt. Like, he's back in the next play. Let's cut it out. I'll just say this. I don't think LSU is very good. I think they've kind of been skating by here. They're just, I don't know. Everything feels a little bit too difficult for them right now. The interesting thing about it is I do think Ole Miss is good. I just have a really hard time trusting Lane Kiffin. And that's my take on that.
Yeah, I think that LSU still has a lot of its defensive problems, and we've seen that since week 1. That was not magically solved by hiring Blake Baker. And I'm with you on Ole Miss. I mean, this was a very prolific offense until they played Kentucky, a real defense. So, again, I don't think they're going to have that issue with LSU, but, how good are they? How good is Ole Miss? And what can we actually learn from them? We'll see. A night game in Death Valley, always a lot of fun. the late night game in Boulder, Kansas State comes to Colorado. We're going to talk about this one a little bit later because one of us may or may not have this as an underdog pick of the week, but just a quick preview on this. Obviously, a lot of star power with Shedeur Sanders, Travis Hunter. We talked to Travis last week when they were on their bye. He's in the Heisman mix for sure. You have Avery Johnson on the other side for K-State, who's coming off his best performance, 259 yards, 3 touchdowns, plus 60 rush yards and 2 rushing touchdowns last week against Oklahoma State. I think this is going to be a game that's really important in the Big 12 race, which I don't think I would have said before the season, but Colorado is like squarely in there after their win over UCF. And then K-State already lost to BYU. So like there's a lot at stake here, and it's a game that's absolutely worth staying up for.
Yeah, I'll get into the X's and O's when one of us might pick this one for an underdog.
I wonder who will be picking them.
Yeah. But to your point, like it's a strange conference, the Big 12, and the way that it could play out and all the different permutations of what is likely to happen in that conference. But like, I think we came in and we were like, oh, what's Prime going to do? And they had that loss to Nebraska where they got punched in the face and pushed around and bullied and looked like a really bad football team. And I think a lot of people said, well, Colorado is going to be terrible once again. And all Prime did was run his mouth all offseason. And quietly, they've made some improvements. I'll get into the details of, and they're right there. The conference is open. So there's going to be motivation. And as you mentioned, both of these teams had an extra week to prepare for this game. So I'm curious what wrinkles we might see.
Yeah, absolutely. Speaking of surprising teams, there's one in the Big Ten. They're 6-0. They were the first team to get bowl eligible this season. Look at that shirt, the Curt Cignetti Marlboro shirt. I ordered mine. It's not here yet. Yeah,
come on, Nicole.
Yeah, that's for, I know. I tried to order it. I'm gonna wear it. I'll wear it next week. But yeah, the Indiana Hoosiers, one of the great stories with this season so far in Curt Cignetti's year one. So Joshua and I were like, hey, we got to talk to the coach. So we were able to catch up with him earlier this week. If you want to listen to the full conversation or watch the full conversation, go to the NBC Sports YouTube page. But here's a snippet from mine and Joshua's chat with Coach Cignetti. We're excited to be joined by Curt Cignetti, head coach of the Indiana Hoosiers, 6-0 for just the second time in program history. So first of all, congrats, Coach, and tell us the secret sauce. How are you guys first team in the country to be bowl eligible this season?
Well, the secret sauce is we've walked off the field getting done what we wanted to get done, right? But I guess when you go all the way back, I mean, my first day on campus, we have 10 offensive starters in the transfer portal and half the defense. So we had a lot of work to do in December, but we brought 22 transfers in 3 weeks, and they were all 2-3-year starters at the places they had been. And I felt in my heart like we had flipped the roster, and the culture change started in the winter with the strength program and then spring ball, summer, fall camp. I thought we had a chance. I really did. And, we put it on the field, and it's nice to get a little break. Accomplish a few things this week, and then next week start Nebraska prep in earnest.
Well, Coach, how do you get it all to come together, right? You talked about bringing in the guys through the portal, and then you said the culture really developed through the strength and conditioning, but like, how does the team really start to take on the culture of the program?
Well, when you take a program over, basically, to keep it simple, you got to change the way people think, inside and outside the program. And you got to set high expectations and standards and have accountability throughout the entire organization, and consistency in performance day in, day out. So you don't have those high highs and low lows, and stay where your feet are. Stay focused on the present moment, control the controllables, right? We try to play that way, one play at a time, 6 seconds a play. Every play's got a life and a history of its own, never too high, never too low. On to the next play, fast, physical, relentless, smart, disciplined, poised. So, I started to see that. About the 5th spring practice, it looked like a practice, but the consistency I started to see show up in August, and now you got to put it on the field, right? So the first game we got off to a fast start, didn't love the way the offense played the last quarter and a half, couple holding calls, couple penalties, got behind the chains, but really played well the second game, even though the opponent wasn't a great opponent, and played pretty good out on the West Coast against UCLA, and so here we go. Now, it's far from perfect. We got a lot of areas we got to improve and clean up yet, but we've answered the bell and, overcome every obstacle along the way.
When you talked about kind of changing the way people think outside of the program, I was on that set at BTN on the day you got the job, and you said, hey, like, we're going to be playing here in Lucas Oil, where the Big Ten championship was going to be played next year. So you were already talking about that. Everyone's seen the clips of you telling everyone to Google me, of the clips from the basketball game last year. Like, how important was it to get that outside energy and the excitement and the fans to believe that these things are possible for Indiana football?
Yeah, and I haven't done that with every other job. I felt it was important in this particular situation just because of the lack of success and the sort of the prevailing attitude around here, lack of excitement, sort of a can't get done here, hopelessness type of I just detected early on within my first couple hours on campus. And so, I had to sort of set an expectation level that, hey, this is what we're about. This is what we've been about, this staff. We're used to winning championships. We're used to winning football games. Failure will not be tolerated here. And we have a blueprint and a plan. And it's all about people you hire and the people you bring into the program to play and create an environment where they can thrive. But that's what we're all about. And that's what we were going to get done year one.
You mentioned your staff, and you brought a lot of those guys over from JMU. How important was it to have them? And when I watch the tape, I feel like I see the fundamentals show up. Like how do they teach the players to replicate what they do in practice on game time?
Well, I think it's huge. I mean, like my offense coordinator has been with me 9 years. My defense coordinator, 10 years, Mike Shanahan and Brian Haynes, not all as coordinator, strength and conditioning, Derek Owens, 5, special teams guys, 6, so on and so forth. And a lot of JMU guys here are people that have played for me in the past that understand how I run things, understand the program, how we practice, how we prepare. There's no surprises because they've been with me a while. So basically, you got a blueprint, you got a plan, and you execute it on a daily basis. You got a certain way you play the game, certain things you emphasize, and you get the players to buy in, and that's a big part of my job right there. You got to get inside their heads, and after a certain amount of repetitions, hopefully they get it, and so far they have.
So when you talk about the staff too, I mean, like, you have coached at different levels of college football. You've won a lot in a number of places. And I think really impressively, like when JMU moved up from FCS to FBS, you guys won right away too. So like, to me, taking that next step to a power conference job, but replicating the way that you guys have done it elsewhere makes a lot of sense to me. But were there people that wondered if what you've done at lower levels would translate, could work in the Big Ten?
Well, I'm sure there were a lot of skeptics out there. I could tell, based on reaction to comments. And even that day up at Lucas Oil, I just had a very subtle vibe that Indiana, you know what I mean? Coming from you guys.
Well, I just were blown away by the idea of, calling your shot. Year one, Indiana, Big Ten title game.
And that's kind of why I made the comment. Good thing I've been here because we're coming back. Just to, it was partly in jest, but partly not. But from my standpoint, like people say, why'd you take the job? Well, I felt like I'd done this turnaround 2 or 3 times before already. So let's do it there. There's no reason with the proper commitment it can't get done. And, I felt strongly that they were going to ante up here. The president and AD assured me, and I believed them and I liked them. And, I knew our way would work. And it was just a matter of putting the pieces together.
All right, let's take this Lucas Oil conversation a step further. So we're sitting here midway through the season. Indiana's bowl eligible, perfect record. You start looking down the schedule, and what we do in our industry is we like to make predictions. And it feels like there is a path, right? And so how much of that conversation happens in the building for you? Or do you talk about the ability to play for a Big Ten championship in year one, or is it strictly day by day?
Yeah, never. We never talk about results. Everything's process oriented. I don't know what the future holds, but I know how we're going to prepare every day for the future. And there'll be no self-imposed limitations on what we can accomplish. And, when we take the field, we'll be prepared and confident.
So I want to talk about your quarterback, Curtis Rourke, because I think if people weren't watching him when he was in the MAC, he was one of the best players in the group of 5, full stop. And he's been really, really good in what you guys are doing offensively. I think Joshua and I have had this conversation. I think he could be in the NFL. But tell us about, when you're looking for a quarterback, you're adding pieces through the portal, how you land on Curtis Rourke, what those early conversations are like, and how he's been able to do this so well for the Hoosiers.
Right. Well, our last 4 quarterbacks have been player of the year in the league on offense, and the previous 2 were one-year transfers like Curtis. So Curtis had played a lot of successful football with player of the year in the MAC in 22, hurt his knee, came back, wasn't cleared till about the first game in 23. So had to round back into form, but it was very evident on tape. He knew how to play the position. He could make the throws. He was poised, could get you back to 2nd and 10 when put in a bad spot, do a lot of touchdown passes, not many interceptions, won a lot of games, 2-minute drives for touchdowns. So liked him, liked his makeup, liked him a lot. He bought into the vision and decided to come, and he's playing great football.
What's it like managing a roster at this point in the season? You got, transfers in, kind of young guys, maybe have an eye on the portal. You're trying to balance, getting the reps and developing young guys versus having depth for game day. Like, how do you manage a roster at this point in the year?
Like any other year, honestly. We're really a veteran team because of all the guys we brought in from the portal. We have a lot of guys that have played a lot of football. Now, what's really different about football today is because they can play 4 games and then redshirt, you get the older guys that maybe are backups on special teams that all of a sudden come to you and they want to go in the portal and do it all over again somewhere else because they're not a starter. That's what's new, but that's going on across the country. At this point in the season, the culture is good. The attitude is good. It's just a matter of staying humble and hungry and avoiding kind of the warm fuzzies and not being complacent, right? And, when it gets to be game week, making sure that we're putting the prep in, the detailed prep, putting the time in, stringing good practices together to give ourselves the best chance on Saturday.
I like the use of warm fuzzies instead of rat poison. I think we should start using that across the board instead.
There you go.
But Coach, as we're getting to know you and as the Big Ten's getting to know you, can you tell us a little bit about your dad and growing up the son of a coach and just sort of how that shaped who you are?
Yeah. Well, my dad, back then, you got to college football by being a high school coach. This is in the 60s. So they won a few championships and he got hired by Dave Hart at Pitt. And 69, we're in Princeton, New Jersey, the 100th year of college football. And then 70 went with Bobby Bowden. He took the West Virginia job. So I'm in 3rd grade and, I'm on the sideline for every game in the locker room at halftime and listening to Coach Bowden and this and that. And then Bobby left in 75 and my dad took over and it came down with cancer, was given his last rites twice. And I was the oldest in the family, but I always wanted to coach. Like 70 sealed the deal for me when we went to West Virginia. And so had that opportunity and learned a lot from him. He was a great man. He was a great leader, led by example, high character, great work ethic, very competitive. And, we were a competitive, sports-oriented family. The younger brothers coached a long time and spent a lot of time as an assistant, obviously, Pitt, and then went with Coach Majors to Pitt his second time around. He was a legend. And Walt Harris knew a lot about quarterback play. And Chuck Amato had come from Florida State, was Bobby Bowden's right-hand man when they were really doing well there, and then had the opportunity to go with Nick on, first year at Alabama, part of the original crew. We're 7-6 our first year, and our first recruiting class, we signed 6 first-round draft choices and go undefeated in regular season year 2, won national championship year 3. So I took a big chance. I was hitting a big 5-0, didn't want to be an assistant anymore, took a D2 job, and woke up many a days thinking I was crazy. 3 kids, 2 girls that wanted to go to med school and 1 in college, and wondering what I did. But, we had family there, and, we were happy and comfortable, built a team, we were good. And moved on to Elon. They were about 10-45 and lost our first game to Toledo and won 8 in a row after that, and then beat JMU up there the next year. and then took the JMU job. And like you said, I love JMU. I was going to stay, but this opportunity appealed to me. So I've been around a lot of great people, a lot of assistant coaches that you've probably never heard of that were great coaches too, that have sort of molded me. But my dad was a tremendous influence.
It sounds like a dream, just if you could build a career and obviously having followed it from childhood, that's amazing. I wanted to ask about this current team. Talked about your quarterback, people talk about the wide receivers and running backs, but is there an unsung hero so far, like a guy who just shows up every day doing the dirty work for you guys that kind of drives things?
Well, as a unit, the offensive line, I mean, we're not deep there. We have 5 guys that have played almost every snap other than when, game's out of reach and we sub out. Those guys have really done a great job. Zach Horton is a guy. Yeah, the tight end. He's a darn good football player, does a lot of things for us, and he plays the game the way it's supposed to be played. Kind of an unsung hero. There's no question about it because, the quarterback's going to get attention, the running backs, the receivers, and there's a lot of receivers and a lot of running backs. That's one thing we do. We spread the ball around. We have about 10 different guys touch the ball every game. But Zach Horton is a tremendous football player.
What would you say, because as you sit here, it's bye week, keys to the second half of the season? What would allow you guys to accomplish what you want in year one? Stay
focused, eliminate the clutter and the noise, improve as much as you can every single day. And that's the whole deal.
Okay. My last question is, I've been told that you have a recliner chair that is 35 years old. I need to know more about this. And does it still work?
Okay. So I get flack from my wife for calling it a lazy boy. It's Bradenton and Young, but we've been married 35 years and we bought that chair the first year we were married. And that chair is 35 years old. It's been sent out for repair probably 3 or 4 different times. It doesn't fit any new house we buy, the TV room or the main room, but it makes the trip, makes the roster, makes the cut, and sits right there in the middle of that room. And I refuse to allow her to replace that chair because that's my chair.
It feels like an old ball coach story. Like, this is so on brand. I
love that it's like your marker of the wedding anniversaries too. You can keep track of like how old the chair is.
The company, actually, there was an article came out and they emailed us and they offered to replace the chair and get my wife one also. And I just told them I'm so attached to this, and they said, well, maybe we can do something to it, but let's not mess with the karma right now. You stay with it this fall. And I said, yeah, that's cool.
Yeah, you can't do anything about it now. And I'm sure she probably doesn't want one. Like, I'm guessing that this is not a chair she ever sits in.
I know she wants to get rid of this one. That's not happening.
All right, well, you can't get rid of it now. 6-0 Indiana for the second time in program history. Coach, congrats on an amazing start. Can't wait to watch you guys the rest of the year.
Thank you. Have a great day.
Oh, Coach was great. Really enjoyed catching up with him. And once again, if you want to see the full interview, you can go to the NBC Sports YouTube page to check that out. But Nicole, I think it's time to get to some power rankings for this week presented by Citi. And after last week and some of the chaos and destruction that went on in college football, destruction. They destroyed a lot of things. Yeah. We decided it might actually be a really good time to take a look at the best 2-loss teams in college football. And it's a weird thing to do, right? People are like, why are you talking about? Well, obviously these teams have the capability of winning big games, but it's a different perspective on the sport. Like some of the teams that are really the meat of the conference that are a tough out. So go ahead and let us know what you got.
Yeah, so I've got Kentucky at number 1. Obviously we've seen them push Georgia. We saw them take down Ole Miss, and those are good teams in the SEC. And they're just a hard out. And that South Carolina game, the further we get removed from it, feels flukier and flukier. Don't think that they would have struggled this much offensively if they played them today. Got Washington in there at number 2. After the big win over Michigan, they rushed the field. But that's a team that could easily be 6-0, right? We talked a lot about this in our pregame the other day because, it's been miscues. It's been a bad 4th down play. They're right there against everyone they played. Got to put Vanderbilt here at number 3, 3-2 on the season. They also should have beat Mizzou. Don't know how they lost to Georgia State. So they're having but this is a good team. Like, this is a genuinely good team They uprooted a bunch of New Mexico State. Diego Pavia is awesome. We love watching him. He is a college football folk hero already. But that's a really good team. That was not a fluke the way that they beat Alabama. I've got Iowa in here and Louisville in here as well, because I think people have kind of forgotten a little bit about them, or they watch Ohio State do what they did to Iowa. I mean, that's what Ohio State's going to do to teams in there with the talent that they have. And Louisville's on a 2-game losing streak here. Should have probably beat SMU. Really a lot of messy and mistakes against Notre Dame. But to me, this is the reason I wanted to do 2-loss teams, Joshua, is in the 12-team playoff world, 2-loss teams are going to be in this at the end of it. And there's going to be some flaws on these resumes. They're not going to be perfect teams, but these are some teams that could surprise people or already have surprised people in their conference play.
Yeah, I think the good point about at the end of the year that 2-loss teams are going to be involved. It's something we should talk about. And then again, I think just from some of the conference races, because the automatic bids are decided by who wins the conferences.
Right.
These are the games that are the tough outs. These are the games that teams might overlook on the schedule because of the record. But these teams can really compete and they can hang tough, and potentially, we've seen, they can pull off upsets. And so I do think we need to highlight how they're playing. Now for Kentucky, I agree with you. The biggest thing for me is their identity as a program. They've kind of been that team that is built on having good defense. Offense might not be great, but they're super tough. They know how to drag you out into deep waters. They make you try to swim back. I love that about them. Washington, as long as they're not hurting themselves, they're phenomenal. And Will Rogers has been really good, and he made some great plays against Michigan. Yeah. Jed Fish and his staff are really good. And as they're able to recruit and as they're able to develop that program, I think they're going to be sitting at the top of the Big Ten here in not too long. We've talked all about Vanderbilt and Diego Pavia and everything about them. It's a good football team. This is not the old Vanderbilt. They're not the doormat of the conference anymore. Iowa's so interesting to me because offensively they are a little bit better. They're not as good on defense. And so it's a little bit of a different way. But once again, identities of programs, they fit. And then for Louisville, I love Shuck. Tyler Shuck is a gunslinger type of guy that I like. I know Jeff Brom likes having him. But you talk about making mistakes, very similar to Washington. I think that they went out and they lost 2 games more than the other team necessarily won them. And they're going to have to figure out a way to not do that. But still, very talented team, can give you a lot of trouble. Got to get better on defense, but I think they can come along.
All right. There was also another team that lost a game. Well, I guess you could also make the case that Miami went out and won it, right? We saw what they did in the fourth quarter, down 25 points in the second half of this game. The reason they might have come all the way back and beat Cal might have been because of the sideline antics that we saw from Michael Irvin. So we were watching this in real time, which was 1 a.m. Eastern. And he just the camera starts panning to him. He's on the sideline in a cat cow pose. He's doing the he's cat on all fours. Part. He's on all fours. He's got he's the butt's nice up, arch in the head's back. Up. Yeah, there's an arch in the back. It's a cat pose or cat pose. So they kept showing him. He's just not moving. He's just this is how he is watching the game. The screenshot that we're showing on the screen right now is from when Cal is still up 13 points at this point. So there's 9+ minutes left in the game, and he's doing this. So he went on. It is what it is podcast, and of course he had a great explanation for this behavior.
Yeah. Oh man, you standing up on that sideline, your backs get tight. Your back get tight. I tell Dion all the time, I don't know how you guys coach, because standing up bothers my back a lot. So I got down one time to stretch my back, but football players are very superstitious. So when I got down there, we were getting killed, and then I got down there to stretch my back, and Miami made a few plays, and we started a comeback. And I thought about it. I said, now I'm stuck down here. I know some people go see this and say something. We got to win the game, So I had to stay there until we mount that comeback. And I did. And it worked.
He is the funniest man in the world. There's nothing that he does that does not make me crack up. He was out there against Virginia Tech. I do. And I kept I kept talking about it. And I don't know if he's a program ambassador or whatever right now. The man always looks like he's hot. He's the most animated person in the world. Guys make plays and he comes over and he's like in their face, like going crazy. And it's just hilarious. And the explanation was so funny too.
So good. So good. That was our WTF on RTF this week. There was no competition. It had to be Michael Irvin. All four on the sideline.
For people who want the behind the scenes, like Nicole and I actively look for the WTF. So like we'll be in the green room on Saturdays and we'll text each other back and forth ideas. And it took us until like 1 a.m. on the East Coast when we saw this. And we were like, scrap all the other ideas. This is going to be it. It had to be. Absolutely had to be. Perfect. All right, let's get to some underdog picks here for week 7. Just for everybody who's kind of been tracking along. If you bet these picks, they might not rush the field, but they are going to cover the spread. We have actually been really on point in picking teams that can cover in these games as underdogs. So Nicole, I'll let you rock here. And just to preface this, Nicole stole my pick. This is the one I wanted to go with, but go ahead.
All right. Well, it was really ripe for the picking. Like the line is pretty interesting. So I'm taking Virginia. They got 7.5 points home versus Louisville. I cannot believe. I know we were just talking about Tyler Shuck and how close to unbeaten this Louisville team would be if they just were not beating themselves. Still, a 2-game losing streak. They are not playing all that well. They've had some big mistakes. They get 7.5 points. They're favored by 7.5 points in Charlottesville. And this is a good UVA team. I love Anthony Calandria is one of the fun. ACC has got a bunch of these quarterbacks that are just like an adventure to watch. But this is a team, UVA, they've won 4 of their last 5 games. This is definitely the best they're playing in the Tony Elliott era. And I just feel like they're flying under the radar here. Plus, they're at home. Plus, they're against a Louisville team that's just lost 2 straight. This feels like easy money, which I know, knock on wood, means it might not be. But come on, I'm riding with the Cavs, riding with the Who's. This seems like pretty straightforward. If you believe in what Tony Elliott's building, which I do, I believe in this team this year.
Yeah, I'm pretty bought in at this point. And to cement this further, like we watch Louisville at the end of these games find ways to lose, whether it's bad clock management or game management, turnovers that come at untimely spots. And the flip side of that is against Boston College, the fourth quarter was on point for Virginia. Yep. Against Wake Forest, I believe it was. They played really well in the fourth quarter of that game. This is a team that when the game is on the line and the time starts winding off the clock, they try to find ways to win football games. And that was one of the biggest deciding factors for me to want to pick this. But Nicole, being the good student that she is, got in the rundown way before I did and put the pick in. And yes, I'm on board with this one. All right, so mine is the one that we talked about earlier. I'm taking Kansas State at Colorado. Colorado 4-point underdog in this one. The line's actually been moving on this. I think they opened up as a 5.5-point underdog somewhere around there. And I think the people are starting to see this. So Colorado, for all of the struggles that they had last year, they're much better on the defensive side of the ball. This is not to say that they're a great defense by any stretch, but they figured out some of the issues that they've had. They've become a little bit more stingy, and they've played really good third down defense. And Kansas State is not a team on either side of the ball that's been great on third downs. So I think that comes into play here. Again, for Colorado on offense, they've been like 45% on third downs as well. So again, for Kansas State, that's probably going to be a spot where they struggle. But Kansas State's defense as a whole, they don't stop the pass very well. I think they're giving up like 280 a game. We know who Shedeur Sanders is, and we know exactly who Travis Hunter is, and some of those other weapons for Colorado as well. But Shedeur goes out there, even when he's under duress and his offensive line isn't taking care of him, which they did the last time they were out. But even when that's not happening, he's very impressive. He is a great quarterback. He's probably QB1 on a lot of people's boards right now after watching the first half of the season. I think that comes into play here. And then Avery Johnson, as well as he played in the last game, still very much a question mark to me. Very good runner of the football. I'm not convinced that if he has to throw it to try to be good, that's going to be a way for them to win ball games. So I think Colorado is in a great spot to pull off an upset here. And as we talked about earlier, Prime has been pretty emphatic about where he thinks his team can go as he builds a program. And for them to stay in the race and in the hunt firmly in the Big 12, I think is important.
And listen, K-State went out, played a late night game at BYU, and just completely got blown out, right? Like, obviously they'll be on guard for that, but it's a similar situation. And another incredible home atmosphere for the team that they're playing. So this one's going to be really fun. Absolutely worth staying up for. And I think it's going to have a huge, huge impact in the standings, which, by the way, Texas Tech leads the Big 12 standings right now because they played one extra game than everybody else. Wild. You look at these conference standings for 6 weeks, it totally reflects the chaos that we've seen so far this season, all the comparisons to the 2007 season with so many different number one teams. What's also cool is, like, Joshua, we were talking about this, like, could we have picked the Vanderbilt upset last week? Like, was that something that would have been on either of our radars? And I think that if you had said, I'm going to take Vanderbilt over Alabama right after they beat Georgia, I'd have been like, I think that's too embarrassing to say on a podcast. Like, I don't think you want to say that on the record. So we were not going to get that one last week. So these are more reasonable, I think. These are more like other people could see the upsets. But shout out to the Doors, because that was the ultimate upset this season.
I wonder if anybody had that ticket, or, like, you know, they threw in maybe a 3-leg parlay and they said, I'll throw in Vandy for, you know, giggles, and then, you know, ended up cashing out and retiring from their job.
I hope someone out there did that. That would be awesome, especially if they're not like a Vanderbilt fan, but just decided like, why not? Like, let's go with it. It had good odds. But yeah, that'll do it for us and Rushing the Field this week. We hope to see more Fields Rush on week 7. Hope y'all enjoy the great games, loaded slate. For Joshua Perry, I'm Nicole Auerbach, and we'll see you next week.